Our scripture this morning is found in the book of Joshua. It's the book of Joshua, chapter 2, verses 8 through 14. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us this land.
Our God is a God of the impossible. He's always giving people impossible dreams, making impossible promises, and handing out impossible tasks for his people to accomplish. Cast out that demon. Tell that lame man to rise up and walk in the name of Jesus. Raise that person from the dead. Go and make disciples of all nations. Take the land. But way too often, when the people of God can't see how they could accomplish the task that he's given them to do, there's a tendency to just settle back and to figure that he couldn't really be serious. Or maybe that's just a job for somebody else, somebody smarter, somebody younger, somebody more spiritual, or somebody with different spiritual gifts. And then the dream fades, the promises go unclaimed, the task goes undone. But history has shown over and over again that if we will simply take God at his word, if we will believe his promises, if we will simply take the first step of faith, if we will challenge ourselves to not rely on our own cleverness or our own ideas or our own resources or our own strength, then we will find out every single time that God is always as good as his word. And we'll also find out that far from him just sending us out on our own, we'll discover that he's actually going before us every step of the way, making the rough places ahead of us smooth, tearing down the mountain heights so that we can get over them, filling in the darkest valleys so that we can walk through them in his light, moving people and things around so that when we arrive at a step in the process, all is ready for that step to be effective, ensuring that every time we put our foot down that there's a solid place for us to stand, and empowering and enabling us to do everything, even the most unlikely, impossible things that he could ever ask of us. Because whenever God gives us a vision, that is actually a personal invitation from God to work together with him in the job of changing our world. This is the second message in our series, Take the Land. A look at the first 8 chapters of the book of Joshua, seeing how the children of Israel moved from an impossible mission, capturing and occupying a 300,000 square mile chunk of land, all the way into making that vision a reality, as well as seeing some of the things that got in their way. Because God has given our congregation a powerful vision, a powerful mission as well. And through the experiences of Joshua and the Israelites' conquest of the Promised Land, we can learn some lessons about how to make our mission a reality as well. Last week we saw that when God gave the mission of taking the Promised Land to the children of Israel, he actually gave them much more than just a mission. He also gave them the power that they would need to complete the mission. And he gave them the promise of his presence. The rock-solid assurance that he was going to be with them the whole time, working in them and through them, guiding and directing them every step of the way, all the way to the finish line. But we also learned that those promises came with conditions that had to be met if they were going to become a reality. The people had to be strong. In other words, they had to put their backs into the jobs that he gave them to do. They had to be courageous. That meant that they had to be willing to move forward immediately whenever God gave the word. And they had to be holy, completely obedient to God in everything that he commanded them to do. In the same way, when God gave us, the people of Souls Harbor, a new vision, he made us the same promises. He had promised us that we will have all of his power that we need to do everything that he is calling us to do. And he's promised us his presence, that he's going to be with us every step of the way, never leaving us or forsaking us. And he also has the same requirements for us. Just like the Israelites, we have to be strong, we have to be courageous, and we have to be holy. So we have made the commitment to pursue the mission that God has given us with his guidance, in his power, and in his strength. But once we've made that commitment, how can we be sure that we're on the right track? How can we tell that we're taking the right steps, heading in the right direction? See, that's what we're going to learn from today's message. So here are Joshua and the Israelites camped out on the east bank of the Jordan River with the promised land just right on the other side. Sorry, got a little tickle. These folks had made a firm commitment to cross the Jordan River and entered the land that God had promised to them. But of course, they understood that there was a lot more that they had to do than just cross the river in order to take the land, because there were already people living in the land. And they weren't just going to be willing to just move aside and let the Israelites have it. People are funny that way. Joshua and his people were going to have to fight for the land. They were going to have to take it by force. Now, 38 years earlier, Moses had sent 12 spies into the land to check it out and bring back a report to the people. Joshua had actually been one of those 12 spies. And they had brought back an amazing report of the land that lay before them. They said, "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit." And they showed all of the people a cluster of grapes that was so big that they had to carry it on a pole between two guys. Well, hey, that all sounded pretty good. But then there came the but. You know the but? You know, this is good, but... But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Wow, this put a whole different spin on things. The people of the land were powerful, and they were armed. And their cities were large and fortified. And there were even giants in the land. See, the Anakites were supposed to be giants. And the people started to mutter among themselves, "Armed soldiers, huge cities, and giants, oh my! Armed soldiers, huge cities, and giants, oh my!" Now, before these things got too far out of hand, Caleb, another one of the spies, shouted for silence and told the people, this is in your sermon notes. I'd like you to read this statement with me. Here we go. "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." See, Caleb, like Joshua, remembered very clearly how God had struck the Egyptians with plague after plague after plague, how he had parted the Red Sea while all 2 million Israelites passed through on dry ground and then brought the waters back together again, right on top of Pharaoh's pursuing army, wiping out every last one of them. I mean, if God could do all that, surely he'd be able to give the people victory over a few giants. But the other men who had gone up to check out the land said, "We can't attack these people. They're stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they had explored. They said, "The land that we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there." Those are giants again. "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." By the way, this is all from Numbers chapter 13. Well, that pretty much settled it for all the people. They decided that they just needed to turn around and head right back to Egypt. I mean, they might have been slaves there, but at least there weren't any giants that they had to fight. And because they wouldn't believe God's promises and act in faith and move forward in the name of the Lord, the whole generation lost the promised land. God wasn't going to let them go back to Egypt. When he freed them from Egypt, he made it very clear that this was a one-way trip. So he kept them out there in the wilderness for 38 long years, clear until everybody who was 20 years old or older died. And now it was time for the children and grandchildren to head into the promised land and take it. Now, Joshua was a wise man. He was a brilliant strategist. And in order to plan the conquest of the people of Canaan, he needed information about the lay of the land, especially the city of Jericho, which was just a few miles the other side of the river. It was kind of the first place that they were going to have to capture. So he decided to send a small party of spies to check things out. Now, he remembered how things turned out the last time that they sent spies, so he did things a little differently this time. Instead of choosing 12 spies, one from each tribe, this time he only handpicked 2 men. And instead of making the mission a big public thing, he sent them secretly without even the other Israelites knowing that they were going. And instead of having them check out and report on the whole land, he just sent them to check out the land immediately in front of them, focusing especially on the walled city of Jericho. Now these 2 men, they quietly crossed the Jordan River at one of the narrow spots nearby, and they walked right into the gates of Jericho. Now, cities back then had these big, tall walls, big, thick walls, and they were built up on hills, so the only way to get in was actually to go into the gate of the city, and so that's what they did. They just walked in. You know, they kind of were nonchalant about the whole thing, but they just kind of strolled in. Now, we're not told how they ended up where they ended up. They ended up in the house of a woman named Rahab. Rahab, the Bible tells us, was a prostitute. Now, honest to goodness, if I was going in to spy out the land, I'm not sure that I would pick a prostitute's house as my first place to go. I'm not sure why they did, other than to think that maybe staying in a local inn might make them too easy a target. And besides, prostitutes, by the nature of their business, often heard things, then she might know some things that could be helpful to them. Unfortunately, as nonchalant as they tried to be, their arrival had not gone entirely unnoticed. They probably tried to not be too obvious, looking just like any other traveler or trader, but the people of Jericho knew that the Israelites were camped right across the river, that there were a lot of them, and apparently they also knew that they intended to take over the land. So somebody in town, when they noticed 2 strangers coming into town and looking around, and then when they noticed them walking off with Rahab, they went and reported it to the king. It didn't take long for the king to put 2 and 2 together, and just after dark, he sent some guards to Rahab's house, demanding that she turn the spies over to them. Now, Rahab was a pretty savvy lady, and when the guards started pounding on the door, she took the men up on the flat roof of her house and had them hide under piles of flax that she was drying out up there. And she told the guards, "Yes, the men did come to me, but I didn't know where they came from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, the men left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." And now the story that Rahab told them actually sounded plausible enough. I mean, she was, after all, a prostitute, and you would expect to have men that she didn't know just drop by her house from time to time. And besides, they would never believe that Rahab would lie about this or hide any spies that came around, because when the Israelites came pounding into the land, she would be just as much risk as anybody else. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan, and as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate of the city was shut, just in case the spies were still hiding someplace in the city. Well, so far so good. The spies were safe in Jericho, at least for the time being, and Rahab had proven so helpful that they could probably get some information that they were after from her. But just before they settled in for the night, they unexpectedly found out one key piece of information that would have settled everything in their minds. They found out that God was already moving, not just in Jericho, but all over the whole land in order to lay the foundation for their victory. Joshua tells us in today's scripture, before the spies lay down for the night, Rahab went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. Now this was amazing. I mean, it had been a full 40 years since the Lord had divided the waters of the Red Sea, but the people of Jericho had not only heard about it, they were still talking about it, and it was freaking them out. And it had been just a few months since the Israelites had defeated Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites, totally destroying their people and taking over all of their cities. But the people of the land had already heard about it, and they were talking about it, and it was freaking them out too. All of these things had terrified not just the people of Jericho, but according to Rahab, the people, everybody in the whole promised land. They all knew that these Israelites, who were just camped out just a few miles away, just on the other side of the Jordan River, were headed their way, intending to take over the whole land. And if Pharaoh's armies and the armies of Sihon and Og hadn't been able to stop them, what chance did they have, even in their walled cities? It was enough to throw everybody into an absolute panic, and that was exactly what it was doing. The cool thing is, when the spies heard this, their minds very likely went back just a couple of months to something that Moses had told them. This is in your bulletin, in your sermon notes too. I'd like us to read this together. Here we go. This very day I will begin to put the terror and fear of you on all the nations under heaven. They will hear reports of you and will tremble and be in anguish because of you. That was an echo, by the way, of a promise that God had made to Israel clear back on Mount Sinai when he said this, I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will make your enemies turn their backs and run. The Israelites weren't going to have to figure out how to beat the people of the land on their own. God himself had promised to go ahead of them and demoralize their enemies, make them afraid of Israel even before they set foot in the land. And here he was, making it all happen exactly as he said. You know, if I was going to be taking over a country, that would be about the best news I could possibly hear. To hear it spoken by one of the people in the first town that we were aiming at, that would be a real faith booster, wouldn't it? And seeing God's hand at work in the area that he's called you to work always has that effect. It's like a big, huge sign that says, you're on the right track. You have heard me correctly, and I am already working to make sure that you succeed. But then Rahab really opened up and shared with the spies the real reason why she was helping them. When we heard of how you defeated all of our enemies, no matter how large or how powerful they were, when we heard that, our hearts melted and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now there's an old saying that you may be familiar with. It says, if you can't beat them, join them. And Rahab was pretty clever. She'd listened to all the amazing stories. She had analyzed the data, and she had come to the conclusion that the only way for these untrained, poorly armed former slaves could possibly have defeated all of their powerful enemies was because their God was more powerful than the other gods of the surrounding people. In fact, she had decided that the Lord, their God, must be the only real God out there. And far from trying to fight against this God or his people, she decided she wanted to become one of them. Apparently, when she was first approached by these two men, she recognized them for who they were and figured that if she was willing to help them to get on their side, that there might be salvation in it, not just for her, but for her whole family as well. She said, "Now then, please swear to me by the Lord, by your God, that you will show kindness to my family because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, that you will save them from death." See, she knew that Jericho was doomed. The clock was ticking. Time was short. But she also knew that after Jericho fell, that Israel was going to move on to the next town, and then the next town, and then the next town after that, and there was going to be no place to hide. But notice that she knew all of this because she'd put the pieces together and knew that the God of Israel was the true and living God. It was him who was behind the successful conquest of Pharaoh and of Sihon and of Og. And you see, you might be able to strategize and fight against the men of an army, but you could never successfully fight against the God who made the heavens and earth. By the way, did you know that that's right? Nobody who has ever tried to fight God has ever won. You can't do it. So here was a desperate cry for salvation by one who knew what the future held to two who were in the service of the God who had targeted her city for destruction. And the two spies seemed to understand that there was something profound going on here. Not only had God protected their lives so far, but here was someone who actually wanted to become part of their people. "Our lives for your lives," the men assured her. "If you don't tell what we're doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." By the way, notice their choice of word. "We will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." Not if, but when. Their faith in God's ability had grown to the point where they are now positive that it's going to happen. Now, as the spies had their faith increased, they were able to have a deeper impact on Rahab as well. She could see that not only were they confident that they were going to be able to take the land, but when they did, they were willing to make sure that she and her family were safe. Now, the spies really needed to get out of town quickly. They had been discovered. Because if the searchers came back and hadn't found them, they'd probably come back and search Rahab's house. And even if they didn't search Rahab's house, they'd probably start patrolling the area around the city, making it harder for them to escape. Now, the back wall of Rahab's house just happened. By the way, just happened, you know what that is? That's God working incognito. Coincidences do not exist in God's universe. But the back of Rahab's house just happened to be the wall of the city. And it had a window in it that looked out. You could look out and see across the whole countryside, because remember, they were a city built up on a hill. So, beautiful view. But the window was the important thing. The spies couldn't get out of the gate of the city because everyone was now on the lookout for them. So she let them down to the window using a rope. Now, Jericho is surrounded by hills that are honeycombed with caves, any one of which would provide a really good hiding place for these spies. So she told them, "Go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourself there 3 days until they return, then go on your way." But before they left, they planned exactly how they would save Rahab and her family. The men said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us, unless when we enter the land you've tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And unless you have brought your family, your father, your mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If anyone goes outside of your house into the street, his blood will be on his own head. We will not be responsible. As for anyone who's in the house with you, his blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell what we're doing, we'll be released from the oath you made us swear." Now, this was a pretty common sense plan. The red cord tied in the window would stand out like a sore thumb if you knew where to look. And that would let them see from the outside which house was hers. And the only way that they'd be able to make sure who was her family and who wasn't would be that she keep them in her house. Anybody they found just wandering around on the streets, they would just kill on sight. Rahab immediately agreed to this plan, and just as soon as the men were on the ground, it says she tied that red cord in her window where it could be seen. Now the spies stayed up in the hills until the third day, and then when the pursuers had given up the chase, they hurried back across the Jordan into the camp, where Joshua was anxiously waiting for their report. This time he didn't have them give their report to the whole community. He met with them in private to hear what had happened. And they told Joshua everything that had happened, including the promises that they had made to Rahab and her family. But the thing that was music to Joshua's ears was when they said these words, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." What a different report than the one that the spies had brought all those years ago. And the thing is, the land hadn't changed. The people in the land hadn't changed. And the walls around the cities hadn't changed. But the people of Israel had changed. This time, they were willing to trust the God who had promised them the land. This time, they were willing to believe that He could do through them exactly what He had promised them. This time, they could see with their own eyes that God had already started the process of conquering the land. He had already given them victories so they could believe in the promise of more. This time, everything was going to be different. Bottom line is this: God has been speaking loud and clear to our congregation, to the board, the leadership, the whole congregation. He has called us to become a brand new congregation, a whole new church with a very clear, a very biblical mission: to go and make Christ-like disciples of the people in the greater Woodburn area. In the process of His calling, He's given us the promise of His presence and His power. He's called us to be strong, to put our best effort into the work that He's given us. He's called us to be courageous, to step out in instant obedience to His directions, no matter what He calls on us to do. And He's called us to be holy, to let Him cleanse our hearts with the power of the Holy Spirit so we can be peaches all the way through. He's called us to read and study His Word continually until it becomes so deeply ingrained in us that it actually changes who we are. And He's called on us to never turn aside from what He tells us to do. Now, we're right at the beginning of this process of becoming a new mission-focused church, but we've taken several of the first steps in the process. We've begun to make prayer a central focus of all that we do. We've begun to change how we think about ministry from an inward focus to an outward focus. We've begun actively going into the community to minister instead of just inviting people to join us here. And we've been working to keep right in the forefront of all that we're doing our primary mission of bringing people into the kingdom and then actively helping them to grow into powerful, mature, reproducing disciples. And just like the two spies in Jericho, as we've taken the initiative and started to move forward, we've already begun to see that pursuing our new vision is actually joining God where He is working. And with each step forward that we take, we can see more and more clearly how God is going ahead of us and has already started to work. For example, as we started reaching out, we have found that God has already started to draw new people into our congregation. As we've made a commitment to prayer, we found out that God has already laid a burden for prayer on the hearts of many of our people and has provided us with many genuine prayer warriors. As we've made a commitment to intentionally help people to grow as disciples, we found that God has already been working in people's hearts, helping them to want to grow stronger as disciples, and He's laid it on the hearts of several others to get involved with helping others to grow. I don't know about you all, but when I see those kind of things going on, it encourages my heart. Just like the spies who went to look over the lay of the land, I can clearly see the evidence that God is going before us in order to make a way. Calling people into a congregation with skills and gifts that we will need in order to become all that He's called us to be. Opening doors to be able to tell other people about our church and all that God is doing here. And instilling enthusiasm on the people of Souls Harbor for the new work that He's doing here. When I see all of this going on, I think the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. Modern translation, this is actually going to work. Now, as we move forward in the days and weeks and months to come, our job is to stay close to the Lord at all times, to listen for His voice speaking to our hearts, and then as soon as we hear Him speak, to trust Him enough to obey His commands. Because when we're willing to do that, we're going to find that when we get to wherever He sends us, we're going to find He's already there. That He's already working and already laying the groundwork for our victory. Isn't that exciting? It really is. And the